Professor
Hello.
Pape, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Yes,
you. Can you hear
yes, we
me?
can hear you. Yes, I will just
O-
turn the volume up a little bit.
Okay. Can you see me as well?
Yes.
Good. Excellent. Good. Very good.
Thank you so much for
No,
doing this.
no, no. It's not your fault. It's was a crazy day. I don't know. People drive like crazy here, and I timed it all very well, but I've been 3 hours on the road and it doesn't move.
Okay, but
Okay.
thank you so much. I will just
No,
do a
it's a pleasure.
brief intervention, intervention, no,
Okay.
presentation, so you can start.
Fantastic.
So
Thank you.
this seminar, as you understand, it's a different one. It's organized by a group of PhD students from different cohorts, and we would like to thank these students for the work that they have been doing over the last months and extend our gratitude to the teaching group of the curricular unit and the Institute for the support. And I would like to say thanks to Professor Pape. He is an Israeli historian and political activist currently based in the UK. He's a professor at the University of Exeter and he directs the European Center for Palestine Studies and co directs the Exeter Center for Ethnopolitical Studies. He is best known for his critical historiography of Israel, particularly his work, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. He has challenged conventional narratives surrounding the founding of Israel and the 1948 Palestinian exodus, and his scholarship continues to make significant impact on both academic and public discourse around the Israeli and Palestinian situation. We are very grateful to have you here, Professor Pape. We won't take you long, but we
Okay.
would like to start with some questions.
Of
So,
course.
first, your work has extensively examined settler colonialism in the context of the Palestinian struggle. Could you explain to us what settler colonialism is and how it compares to other historical examples, particularly in terms of ethnic cleansing, the genocide, and the Nakba?
Yes. First of all, good to see you all, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to talk to you online. I wish I could be there in person. I think it is important to distinguish between classical colonialism, where you have empires that send its own people to colonize different parts of the world, and when the empires collapse, the people who came from the empire go back to the empire. Settler colonialism is a different historical phenomenon. This is usually the case of people in Europe who were not welcomed in Europe, who were persecuted in Europe for various reasons, religious, economic, and cultural, and n- try to build a new Europe out of Europe. And they try to do it in places where already other people already lived. And scholars that look at this phenomenon of people who are outcasts in Europe go and colonize other places with the help of empires to begin with, uh, looked at this as a settler colonial phenomenon. And what was so unique about it was that the places they chose were always places where other people already lived, what we call the indigenous people or the native people. And many scholars of settler colonialism say that in the moment of the encounter between these European outcasts, if you want, and the native indigenous population, a logic of the elimination of the native was activated, because the only way these Europeans who were not wanted in Europe could see a way of building a new Europe was by getting rid of the indigenous people in the new countries that they have chosen as the new homeland. And this elimination of the native took different parts in different historical periods and different geographical places. In North America, it took the form of a genocide, as it did in Australia. In Palestine, it took the form of ethnic cleansing. But the elimination is the same objective, namely to get rid of the indigenous people and to take as much of their territory as possible. There are other things which are very unique to settler colonialism and are not typical to classical colonialism. For example, the appropriation of the history of the native as your own history, or some of the customs of the natives as your own customs. So you totally wipe out the history of the native and you take it over as if it's your own history. And in many ways, the Jews were not welcome in Europe. They were looking for a Europe to be built elsewhere. They chose Palestine because of the biblical connection to Judaism, but there were already Palestinians living in Palestine. And the only way of creating a European Jewish state instead of Jews being in Europe was to do it by force, by imposing that idea on the local Palestinians and eventually trying to dispossess them and take over as much of Palestine as possible. By now, by 2025, we can say that the Zionist movement succeeded in taking over the whole of Palestine, succeeded in creating a Jewish nation state, but succeeded only, in inverted commas, of getting rid of half of the Palestinians who live in Palestine. And nowadays, you have political elites in Israel who are absolutely convinced that this is now the historical moment to complete not only the takeover of the territory, but getting rid of the Palestinian population as a whole. That's why scholars talk about settler colonialism as a structure, not a one-off event. It's a structure that continues as long as the ideology justifies taking over someone else's homeland and getting rid of the people who live in that homeland. And in 1948, there was a massive expulsion of Palestinians, but half of the Palestinians still remained in historical Palestine. We have seen massive killing of Palestinians in Gaza in the last year and a half. We are we are hearing conversation about ethnically cleansing Palestinian from the Gaza Strip, they're ethnic cleansing Palestinian from the West Bank. Historically, we're in the same chapter. We're in the same ideological mindset that believes that the Zionist movement had the right and the power to get rid of the people of Palestine because Europe didn't want the Jews, so the Jews need a European state, and it has to be in Palestine at the expense of the Palestinians.
Thank you, Professor Pape. We would like to ask you, like the notion of the empty land, the terra nullius, has been used to justify actions in Palestine. How has this concept shaped the Israeli colonial project, and how similar settler colonial dynamics manifest in other regions like Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, for example?
Yeah. Well, it's uh, 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 it's interesting how it evolves. It begins by convincing yourself that the country you go to, the new country, the new homeland, is empty. Even if the evidence is there that the land is not empty, you develop this idea of terra nullius by saying that actually the people who are there are not organically connected to the place. They are nomadic. And therefore, it's not even a matter of transferring them, it's just something they do anyway. You know, they don't belong to the country. Now, once you begin to build the settler colonial project, this becomes more and more unrealistic because the people are there. You begin to understand that these are not nomad people, that there are villages, there are cities, there is elite, there's an urban society, there's a rural society, and therefore you want to create a terra nullius, not because there is a terra nullius, an empty land, but you want to create an empty land. So the whole historical idea of settler colonialism in Australia, in North America, in Palestine was that you imagine an empty land, you arrive to a land which is not empty, and then you try to empty it. And of course, it takes different forms in different historical periods and different geographical locations, but the mechanism is the same. In this respect, what I think is unique of the particular Israeli political elite we have now, that the terra nullius is not seems not to be totally confined to historical Palestine. They seem to think that they not only want to take over the homeland of the Palestinians, but to recreate what they think is the glorious time of the Jews according to the Old Testament, according to the Bible, when a Hebrew kingdom or a Jewish kingdom stretched not all over Palestine, but even beyond Palestine. And I think part of the Israeli insistence now to have presence in Western Syria and in South Lebanon, it's that idea that actually historical Palestine is not enough. What you want is the biblical land of Israel at his highest moment of expansion during the biblical times. And that's why you see this invasion, if you want, into South Lebanon and into Palestine. Um, what is unique is also the engagement, the engagement of other countries, because of the kind of alliance that a regional power such as Iran is trying to put the kind of counterbalance to Israel, that the whole settler colonial project impacts the region as a whole in two ways. One is the one we're seeing right now, that there is a regional power like Iran that tries to help the Palestinians, not only for genuine reasons, also for its own reasons, but nonetheless, it involves other countries. But there's something deeper here, even before Iran got involved, even before the Iranian Revolution, when Iran was an ally of Israel. And this is the fact that for most people in the Arab world, Palestine is still an unsolved colonial issue. And as long as it's unsolved, it allows political leadership in the Arab world not to deal properly with their own problem. So there is an organic connection between the lack of solution in Palestine and the inability of Arab regimes and Arab rulers to deal properly with the problems in their own countries and in the Arab world in general.
Um, we also wanted to ask you, how do you see that Christian Zionism, imperialism, and corporate interests contribute to the sustaining of colonial projects globally? And if you could expand on the rise of the neo-Zionism and what is the implications for the region?
Yeah. I'm not sure that Christian Zionism influences every part in the world. It's important to see its historical evolvement and its present condition, which I will try and do now. And then one can see both its expansion globally, but also its limit. So it doesn't influence everything in the world. Um, Zionism, as I said before, was a European solution for a European problem of anti Semitism. Instead of dealing with anti Semitism, Europe decided to create a European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world at the expense of the Palestinians. For doing that, you needed a powerful coalition. And one important member of that coalition were evangelical Christians churches that believed that the arrival of the Zionists in Palestine is going to precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the end of time, the resurrection of the dead, a whole divine scheme that they believe that the Zionist project in Palestine is going to push forward in order to get back Jesus Christ in many ways. And this is still a very deep faith that characterizes not only Christian Zionists in America, but also in the Scandinavia, in Latin America, and even among Christians communities in Southeast Asia. So it's a member, I would say Christian Zionism is a member of a global alliance that believes that creation a Jewish state at the expense of Palestine, sustaining it even by force, is their own interest. They believe in that project for theological reasons. Other members of that alliance, like neo-capitalists, multinational corporations, um, neocons, and so on, or Jewish communities, believe for different reasons that they should support the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine. But the Christian Zionists believe in it theologically, religiously, and therefore and are a very important component because of the relative political and economic power that they have in the United States. I don't think they have that much power elsewhere in the world, but they do have. And as long as America has influence globally, the Christian Zionists in America are important factor influencing American policy that relates directly or indirectly to Israel, which could also impact cases which are not directly connected to Palestine. For example, freedom of speech in the global West, policies towards Iran, towards the Arab world. Uh, it's a kind of a worldview that sees America as leading the forces of good against the forces of evil, and Israel is the epitome of the forces of good. That not will not always be the case, but historically, this was very important. You ask about Neo Zionism. Neo Zionism is actually, for me, the new version of Zionism that developed on the 21st century in Israel. Uh, this was a much harsher version of Zionism and a kind of realization about so by many Israeli Jews that the idea that you can have both an ethnic racist Jewish state and a democracy is not workable. And not only it's not workable, it weakens Israel's ability to survive. So people who grew up in the Jewish settlements in the West Bank, people who grew up in a more religious, traditional environment, especially the third generation of North African Jews, together interpreted Zionism once again not as a movement that tries to be both liberal or even socialist and building a Jewish nation state, but one that is not interested in universal values as democracy, liberalism, or socialism, is only interested in actually making the state even more Jewish, I would say more theocratic, and therefore more racist and making Israel, as I said before, a power that everybody in the region would be afraid of or would like to be in alliance because of its immense power. That's for me is Neo-Zionism, which is not only directed against the Palestinians, but also against secular liberal Jews that are seen by Neo-Zionists and an obstacle for the survival and thriving of the Zionist project altogether.
Professor Pape, you have written about the concept of slow violence, right?
Yes.
Um, would you consider, for example, I was thinking about the latest humanitarian aid blockages that Israeli is imposing in Gaza. Would you consider this an example of slow violence? And if not, before this escalation and this genocide, could you illustrate how slow violence manifested in the daily lives of the Palestinian
Yeah.
living under the occupation?
In fact, I was talking about incremental genocide, even more than just violence. What we have to understand about the settler colonial project that it cannot always act dramatically. In 1948, the settler colonial project of Zionism was dramatic. In 9 months, it expelled half of Palestine's population. In the last year and a half, the settler colonial state was dramatic. It massively killed, we don't know yet the final numbers, but probably more than 200,000 directly and indirectly, 200,000 Palestinians. But in between these dramatic events, on a daily basis, people are being killed, imprisoned, expelled, wounded because they are Palestinians and they are obstacle for the fulfillment of the settler colonial project. And that's the incremental violence, if you want, or the slow death. Call it what you want, but that means that this machinery that tries to complete the idea of turning the historical Palestine into a purely Jewish state with as few Palestinians as possible is working 24 hours 7. Sometimes it's directed against one person, sometimes it is directed towards a village, a neighborhood in the city, and sometimes, as happened in 47, in 48, and in 24, 25, against the whole section of the Palestinian population. So we have to be aware. Why is it so important? Because the media is not interested in the daily incremental slow fulfillment of the project. It's not interested in the expulsion of one person, the killing of two-person. It only becomes interested when this machinery is dramatic, as happened in 48 and recently. So I think that's why this concept has to be worked even more, and students should work on it because that's the one thing that gives Israel a time to do what it does, because it's very difficult to attract attention to the slow, to the incremental, to the daily manifestation.
Um, Drawing upon this media framing of the genocide, drawing on Edward Said Orientalism concept, how has the Western media, we see that the Western media does not frame the genocide in Palestine as clearly as you see, as we see, and what mechanisms are used to justify or downplay Israeli actions, and how does framing Israel as a democracy committing genocide could influence Western political views and shape the global perceptions?
Well, language is very important. Language is very important to create a shield of immunity. Language is a filter through which people are being acquainted with what goes on, with interpretation of what goes on. Now, if you use a language that sometimes describes exactly the opposite of what's happening, or already in the language itself justifies an act that actually without that justification would be condemned by people in the outside, then you understand the power of this. So the bad thing about this filtering through inaccurate language, through fabrication, through misleading information, is that it provides this immunity for a country and a state and an army to do what it does, that the only way to stop it is by pressure from the outside. And that's why it works so well, because it's not stopping the Palestinians from resisting this language, but it stops Europe, it stops the United States, it stops other countries in the world to help the Palestinians not to be exterminated or eliminated by Israel and its policies. So if you call Israel a democracy, whereas actually Israel is an apartheid state, when you call the Israeli policies self-defense, where actually they are a mixture of ethnic cleansing and lately genocide, you are disallowing political powers, whether these are governments, international tribunals, United Nations, regional organization, from taking any effective and decisive action against the Israeli policies. And that's why I think we, in the academia, we should start by using the accurate language, because so many academics in the West are not using these language. They don't dare to call Zionism colonialism. They don't dare to call Israel an apartheid state. They don't dare to call what Israel did in 1948 ethnic cleansing, and they don't dare to call what Israel is doing now in Gaza as a genocide. But we should insist why the academia is important, because these definitions are not an ideological position. They are based on a careful scientific scholarly examination of these terms. And that's why they are powerful. And that's why Israel is fighting with all its power to silence academics and journalists who do dare to use the correct language to describe what was going in what happened in the past and what is going on today.
And following on that, we have seen lately that academics who speak out on Palestine in Germany, in the UK, in the US, often face censorship and professional consequences. And how this repression impact advocacy and knowledge production related to Palestine, and how can this be reconciled with an idea of independent and progressive academic environment?
Well, I think what we see here is something we saw after 9/11. Um, there are, in Western democracies, there are quite a few elements who don't like the democracy or think the democracy is going too far. They can be in the security service, they can be in university management, they can be in the police. They use events like 9/11 or the huge support for Palestine after the 7th of October to tell their governments, you see, this is now a dangerous moment where freedom of speech actually allows people to support terrorism or incite anti-Semitism, which, of course, in both cases is totally ludicrous. It's not correct. But they're using it in order to silence freedom of speech of academics, of students, of people. Gaza here is the pretext, is not the main objective. It's a pretext to try and regulate people's ideas, opinions, because if today they can talk freely on Gaza, who knows, they might talk freely on other issues what governments are or establishments are afraid of. So I think that, first of all, this is the wider context that situations like this are exploited by non-democratic forces within democratic societies to curb freedom of speech. Now, in the case of Palestine, there is also a very powerful lobby, pro-Israeli lobby, that works very hard to make sure that to equate support for Palestine with support for terrorism, for condemnation of Israel to be equated with anti-Semitism. Now, I think most academics, including managements of universities, know that these accusations are baseless. The problem is that particularly management of universities, but also academics as members of society, are not particularly courageous. And even if they know that this criticism is valid, as I said, is also based on proper scholarly work, they don't want to be accused of being anti-Semites or, God forbid, supporting terrorism. So they don't want the headache. So they would rather clamp down on students and on vulnerable academics rather than be loyal to what they are supposed to do as academics, which is to protect the freedom of speech and freedom of research and freedom of expression. And that's very sad to see it. But it's, it can be amended if academics would show a little bit more courage. And I'm not underestimating the fact that academics can lose their jobs and can be under big pressure from the establishment in universities if they do that. But after all, you live only once, and you have to ask yourself, where were you when other academics were afraid to talk about the truth because they were worried about their career? And I'm not going to judge anyone. I'm just saying that sometimes you can't have it both. You can't have a secure career and a genuine expression of your ideas. So every person to himself and herself have to decide how do they react. I can tell you on my own experience that I was expelled from my university in Haifa because I was loyal to my ideas and I knew it would cost me my job. But I don't say everyone can do it. I don't think I'm recommending it to everyone, but I'm saying sometimes the choice is there are only two choices. There's no other third choice, and therefore we won't see too many academics that would be brave enough to be loyal to their ideas because they're worried about their, uh, career and positions.
Professor Pape, being aware of your time and before opening the discussion, I would like to ask you one final question.
Mhm.
You have stated lately that decolonization in Palestine is a matter of when and not if. So,
That's
would you
right.
like to elaborate on that? And finally, what factors could accelerate this process? And how do Palestinian diaspora and global solidarity movements could contribute to dismantling the colonial project?
Yeah. Well, decolonization is already started because I can see the indicators. The indicators are sometimes very different from one another. So they have the potential to decolonize when they will meet together into a big transformative event. That hasn't happened yet, but it will happen to my mind, although, as I said, I don't know when. One indicator is the implosion of the Israeli Jewish society from within. The religious and secular, or if you want, the neo Zionist and the classical Zionist societies seem to have nothing in common. They are embroiled in an internal fight that weakens Israel from within. There are no indication that this is going to weaken. In fact, there is an indication that the neo Zionist ideology is going to triumph, which means a lot of liberal Israeli Jews would leave. They're already leaving in great numbers, which would weaken very seriously economically, politically, and militarily Israel. A second indicator is the inability of the army to defeat even guerrilla movements, such as the Hamas and Hezbollah. So it's not an invincible army. And this is an army that, according to its own message to the people of Israel, have to fight all the time and win all the time. Now, historically, this is impossible. And I think it would erode the confidence in the army, which can also contribute to decolonization. Economically, Israel has never been dependent on America as it is now. And this is an America that, even with Trump, is not very eager to throw money outside of America. So there is also this potential for economic deterioration. Jewish people, especially young Jewish people, are dissociating themselves from Zionism. Don't see them Zionism as the only way of expressing Judaism. Without the support of Jewish communities around the world, it would be very difficult to sustain the colonialist project. And finally, the international community at large, and maybe not the governments, but definitely the societies, regard Israel as a pariah state, as a rogue state, and are very much willing to do the same thing that they did vis-a-vis apartheid South Africa through campaigns of boycott, divestments, and sanction. Now, for all that to work and to contribute, the international community has one important task, which is to move the strong sentiment that societies feel into policies of government. If you want to move from the B and D, the boycott and divestment, into the S, the sanctions, to find way to get to the politics from above, to make it worthwhile for politicians to adopt the position towards Israel that so many members of their societies would like them to do. The Palestinian role is very clear, because the decolonization without an idea what would replace it can lead to chaos and violence for a long term. Only a clear, united, representative Palestinian vision of the future that includes a vision for the Jews who live in Israel today can ensure that the decolonization first would be accelerated and would be replaced by a more solid and a positive political structure.
Professor Pape, thank you so much. If you could spare us 10 more minutes, we would
Yes, of course.
um,
Of course.
invite everyone who has questions to participate in the discussion. So, is there any questions? Okay, we have one question.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Pape. Thank
Hi.
you for your communication. So I would like to know how this intergenerational trauma that Palestinians may face in future generations, how can this be addressed even now and in the future? And how can we, as researchers and public health advocates, have an active role in this part and take an active role in this discussion? Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very important question, and I'm sure there are better people who are able to do this. A colleague of mine, Jason Miller, just coined a new term, uh, uh, medicide. You know, like genocide, that the whole destruction of the Palestinian health system, not only in Gaza. I think that incrementally it's being also destroyed in the West Bank, and that includes also mental services. You know, dealing with the collective trauma and the individual trauma. So right now, there are no mechanism that can help the Palestinians to deal with the ongoing trauma. Of course, they're not in the post-trauma situation. Unfortunately, they're in the midst of the trauma, and I don't see an immediate end to it. But I think health workers should look at this destruction of the services that should at least help people to deal with the mental issues as part of the genocidal policies. I think it's very important to demand from the international legal system to include the attack on health system in general and on services that provide treatment, mental treatment, and so on, as part of the destruction. Because if you're only limiting the discussion on genocide to the people who were killed, and you don't see the collateral, I don't like collateral damage, if you don't see the what, who else is suffering and in what way and through which period of time, you undermine the magnitude of the catastrophe. And I think it is important because uh, the genocider, the colonizer, the ethnic cleanser is a society and a state. It's not just people who kill and shoot. It includes mental health worker in general, who probably betray their own commitment to treating human beings, and by serving the army, by serving the secret service, by serving the state. We need to have a very tough conversation with them about their own role, and we need to make sure that the international system and our governments understand that what's happening to the health system in general, including the mental services and so on, is part of the destruction that can have far-reaching impact. And I think those of us who understand exactly the impact of the lack of such services, of the destruction of such services, on children, on the future generation, the present generation, I think can really play an important role in making sure that conveying the fact that Europe is complicit, for instance, or America is complicit in not only building the settler colonial project, but it's in its present phase of destructing and destroying the people of Palestine.
Hello,
Hello.
hello, Professor Pape. As I understood, you are in Haifa right now.
Hmm.
So you are in the 48 territories of Palestine, the territories that were um, ethnic cleansed in 48 and that are now considered the state of Israel. And one of the things that I want to ask you is this connection between the cities that are considered now belonging to the Israeli state and their universities and institutions and people, and what is the role of Portuguese institutions, like, for example, ISPUP, the one that we are now, or University of Porto, on boycotting the connections with these institutions, with these scholars, with these researchers, and at least in Portugal, during the student movement, like the encampments in the University of Porto for Palestine, that was, of course, dismantled with police force last May, it was replied to us that the science is neutral, so there is no problem doing connections with Israeli institutions or university or scholars because science is neutral. So based on this myth, on this lie that Western people say to themselves, for not to feel complicit with the genocide going on in Palestine for 76 years. What do you think is the role of boycotting Israel institutions, scholars, researchers, and how can we move forward to that position without being afraid to be called anti-Semite or whatever?
Yeah, well, I think we already have a very good movement, the BDS movement, that includes the academic boycott, and it has a very clear guidelines. It does not boycott individuals. It boycotts, rightly so, academic institutions in Israel because they are directly and indirectly complicit in the occupation and the other crimes committed against the Palestinians. This is not a new phenomenon. I think it started probably already 2010. So there's already a lot of experience of how to deal with academic institutions. So it's good to be part, of, first of all, of the global network of the BDS and get advice from them. And I think that some of the student encampments, especially in America, were able to push for divestment, or at least ask the university to think about divestment. I think that, of course, the idea that academic knowledge is pure and scientific and objective and has no connection to moral or political or politics or ideology, of course, is nonsense. And therefore, academics cannot exempt themselves from what other human beings are suffering or what other human beings should do when they see other people suffering. This is a very cheap excuse not to do anything. And therefore, I'm sure that the very successful academic boycott campaigns that worked in universities such as in Scotland, in some Norwegian university, in some Spanish university, could be a very good model for universities in Portugal. Universities always were two things. They were business and management on the one hand and the community of scholars. I think your community of scholars in any university in Portugal would understand exactly what we are talking about and why it is important to boycott institutions, academic institutions, and check what the universities are investing in the military and security services of Israel. Um, the problem is the management. The management is afraid of the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Higher Education, uh, that looks at university as a business that might benefit from businesses with Israel. This is a long struggle. The best thing is not to do it alone, but to do it together with other places and be ready for a long struggle because there are a lot of very high interests involved in here and not all of them are ideological. Some of them are financial, but that's part of a struggle worthwhile being part of it, in order to remain on the right side of history. I cannot hear you.
Okay, hello, and
Hello.
thank you for your time. I just want to ask you, how can the international community contribute to rebuild the Palestinian infrastructures and ensure that their dignity as human beings is assured and respected?
Well, the most important thing is to let the Palestinians lead this uh, rebuilding, not to call it reconstruction as if this is a real estate issue, as the Trump does, but just allowing the Palestinians, first of all, to be the main driver of the conversation about the future. Still, all the so called peace efforts were led by Israel and its supporters, and the Palestinians had to react to it. We need the Palestinians to be the ones who tell us what they want in the future and others to react to it. Part of it is to see how to rebuild it. But of course, first we have to stop the destruction in order to start the construction. But the construction has to be led by the Palestinians with their idea, with their visions. Very difficult, but very important to not to allow neo-capitalist elements to make money out of it, not to allow governments to make sure that they use it in order to rob the Palestinians of their dignity and rights. I think there are a lot of there's a huge number of very capable Palestinians who know how to do it in different fields and walks of life, who can prepare the programs, can prepare the ideas. We need an international community that allows them, that sees them, turns them from invisible to visible and leading factors in building the future. Can we have the last question?
Um, I think we don't. Does anyone have a question? No.
If not, great.
Yes, you are free to go, and we are so
Okay, thank
glad
you.
that you met us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you. Oh, I can hear you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And
Bye
all the
bye.
best. And we'll talk. Bye
All the
bye.
best to
Thank
you
you.
too. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.